Good morning all. Do you remember this? Well, you should do because it was 3 videos ago, I think. A panel just covered in flashing LEDs, which when powered up looks like this. And with the exposure compensation set to minimum, ooh, has that gone back up? I can't see what's happening. Looks like this. Or this. Does different things when the camera's filming. But anyway, that's about the best I can get that. Now I'm going to build another one of these starting now. So let's get another board. And I'm going to put flashing LEDs on it, probably just 4 to start with. And that's because I'm also planning to put on one of these things. These are little 5-volt supercapacitors, and the way they've been implemented is that you've got 2.5 volt, or in some cases actually this one's a 6 volt, to 3 volt supercapacitors in series. So let's start with this one. This is a 6 volt 1.5 farad. I think these two are both 5 volt, but we'll come back to those in a moment. Let's get this one out of its bag. Now these supercaps all came from AliExpress. I am using AliExpress kind of in preference to eBay now, unless of course I want something quickly from a UK seller, and then I'll go back to eBay. So let's have a closer look at this one. Apologies for the terrible lighting today. It's massively overcast and raining heavily. But yes, this one is 6.0 volt 1.5 farad. Now I'm not entirely sure whether that 1.5 farads is completely correct, because I can see through this plastic film to the capacitors inside. Let's see if I can get a magnifying glass on that. I've put on one of the overhead lights to try and get some more light on this, but just near the C there of CDA I can see 3.3 farads on the left hand capacitor there. So rather than what this says, which is 1.5 farads, really it's 1.65. And over on the right hand side, yes, just down at the bottom here near the crease. Oh, it's not coming over on camera very well. But I can see that it says 3.0 volts. So the 6.0 volts is correct. Well, now that's correct if this thing charges both capacitors completely evenly. So how well are they matched? And on this one, you can't get to the midpoint between the two capacitors. But on one of these others, you can. So we'll have a look at that. And of course, then you could do some tests discharging one of the capacitors while the other one is charged, and seeing how well the balancing works between the two series capacitors. And indeed, I mean, it doesn't look to me like any of these capacitors have active electronics to balance the two individual capacitors. But do they automatically balance through what I have in the past referred to as springiness? Right, I've got a streak of light here from the overhead light. I've got 2 overhead lights, so I can balance it a bit. But I'm going to turn that off, and we'll just have to have very grainy imagery because there's very little light today. Now I'm just going to put some of these LEDs in here, but just pushed in. I've slightly opened the legs of these LEDs so that they sit in there with a little bit of grip. So I'll just put 4 of those in. You can probably guess I've already done this to test this out. And then I'm going to put the supercapacitor in. Now because this this board is just 2 nets, I think the top net is, yes, 5 volts, and the bottom net is ground. The bottom copper area is all ground. I can just put this supercap in. It doesn't fit terribly well, but I can put it in across 2 of the empty LED spaces. So I must get my pos and neg the right way around. Right, that's negative with the dashed lines. So if I put pos up there and neg there, yes, there is a little bit of charge left in this one. but not enough to get those to light up bright. So now what I need to do is charge the supercapacitor, and what I have been doing, I'm not sure whether it's entirely sensible, because I'm not quite sure what the maximum current you can force into these things is. If I undo this, I'm just using this set of 4 batteries. Now the total voltage of these sit at about 1.25 when they're reasonably well charged, so you've got 5 volts here. This capacitor is actually a 6 volt one, so this is entirely okay to do. So let's undo these 2 screws. Oh, don't want those shorting together really. And now try and put the wires into here. So that is a ground point. I'm going to push that one in. And then touch this one onto a positive 5 volt point. Charge the capacitor up. It's not charging very well. Why is that? Probably because of lousy connections. But I think that's brighter. Now the charging current from this pack of batteries is going to be, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 amps, maybe something like that. So we're charging that capacitor quite quickly. The question is, how long will this capacitor run for? I should get a little stopwatch, shouldn't I? Well, my phone has got a little 10-minute countdown timer here, so I can use that. Let's just get this charged back up. I'm not sure what... Oh yes, that is going brighter. I think there might be an issue with these batteries again. Let's check them. Okay, 12 volt version of the BL700. Let's check these. Oh, 1.2, 1.2, 1.2, and 1.2. Well, they're all okay, so why am I not charging my supercap very effectively? Ah yes, I think I just didn't leave it long enough to really build the charge in these capacitors up to get a nice high voltage. Anyway, that's been sitting there for a few seconds. So let's start the timer. I can't remember how to change it from 10 minutes, but 10 minutes may be enough. We'll come back in 10 minutes and see how much dimmer these have become. Right, the timer is clearly finished. Oh, that's a horrible noise. Yes, they're... How do you shut this thing up? Like that. They're quite a bit dimmer, so I'm not sure whether it's going to last another 10 minutes. Let's start the timer again, and we'll do another 10 minutes and see what they're like after 20 minutes. And so after another 10 minutes, I think you have to push that up. Yeah, something like that. 20 minutes in total. This has now dimmed down to the point of being not very interesting. So I want to make a little ornamental thing with LEDs on the front and a supercapacitor on the back, such that it sort of sits on the table at a nice jaunty angle. I think I've come to the conclusion, to make this interesting, I'm going to put a full row of 12 LEDs across there, so we'll get those soldered in. But first, let's take a look at these other 2 supercaps. So the one I've been using is this CDA 6 volt 1.5 farad, although I maintain it's 1.65 farads because of what I can see under the wrapping. This one here is a 5.5 volt 2.5 farads, so it's higher capacity, and this one is a Maxwell 5.0 volts 2.5 farads. Now these came from an AliExpress, well they all came from AliExpress, but these 2 were sent by the same seller and I only actually bought one, and the seller said we can't give you the exact one you ordered, although we got one of an identical value, it's just a different footprint, so we'll throw in another one which is another one of these CDAs, and they said we hope you enjoy your free capacitor. Well, I am. So let's get these out and have a closer look. Yeah, so 6 volt 1.5 farads, 5.5 volt 2.5 farads, and 5.0 volt 2.5 farads. Now what's interesting about this one is that there's a little PCB on the bottom, and you can actually see where you got the positive of one supercap. Its negative is on this central strip, and I think this is actually the PCB. So I think I can just cut a bit of this covering away. I don't really want to solder to these solder points. There does seem to be a conformal coating here, but scrape a bit of that away, and I can get to this midpoint, because what I'm interested in is to see how well balanced these two supercaps are. So I'm not going to do that in this video, but in a later video I want to put a third wire on here and then measure the two voltages and push current in and pull current out, and just see how well these two caps stay balanced. Because like I say, I don't think there's any active circuitry in here. I think they just stay balanced by virtue of the way... Oh, that's interesting. Does that say 2.7 volt? Yeah, 2.7 volt, which actually makes that 5.4 volts, doesn't it? So these are all mislabeled, really, aren't they? Wow, it's a lot brighter. The gloomy sky has become much brighter, so it should be a much less grainy image. In fact, let me show you that. Old style, holding the camera in front of my monitor shot, like what I used to do in the old days. But this is today's solar graph, and you can see that it was 20 watts dropping down to nothing, going back up to 20 watts, which is the minimum that my inverter can produce, and then going back to nothing. And it did that for a full, I don't know, 3-4 hours in the early part of the day, and now it's shot up to, what is it? Oh, about 200 and something watts. So yes, suddenly the sky has cleared. So I think to give this mini project a little bit more runtime, especially if it's got 12 LEDs, a complete row soldered in, I'm going to use this cap, 5.5 volt, 2.5 farads, because it's got more storage than the little 1.5 farad capacitor. And also I want to keep this Maxwell one back for when I do my voltage measurement of the two series capacitors. So let's get a row of 12 LEDs soldered in there. Put this capacitor on the back. Now, interestingly, will this span neatly across a positive and a negative? Oh, it's not bad. So yeah, that can make a nice little stand coming out of the back, and then it'll sit on the desk with 12 LEDs all in a nice row. Let's get soldering. Tip cleaning shot. Cool iron, so I'm using a sponge. When you get a really hot iron, like one of those power tool battery powered irons, you just can't use a sponge. It's just too hot. So the what are these things called? The brass shavings type thing is better for a very hot iron. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, the base fell off my brass shavings thing, and it's full of 50p's. I'd forgotten I put those in there, and they were just to give it some weight on the base. Okay, and iron up to temperature, so soldering shot. Oh, my eyesight's just shocking these days. Can't see what I'm doing at all, even with pound shop close-up glasses. But that'll do. Soldering the other side, the other leg. Will you stay still? Stupid idea using a pen to support it. Blue tack, far more sensible. That's not going to fly around the desk, is it? Yeah, this is a bit more tricky from the bottom because I'm on the side where the spokes are attached to the copper area, and it's sucking the heat out of the iron more quickly. Right, there are my 12 LEDs all soldered in a row. Now I've just charged this capacitor up, so let's poke pos into a pos hole, neg into a neg hole, and yep, the LEDs light up. Now, one thing I've thought is that with this capacitor permanently soldered on here, you'll never see that, where all the LEDs come on together. I mean, it doesn't last for long. They all randomize fairly quickly, but of course, with this soldered on here permanently, gotta be careful not to short out the cap, you'll never actually see that, because when you charge this up, the flashing will start to occur even before the lamps reach a visible brightness. We can have a look at that in a moment. I'll get this soldered on, and then I can slightly twist it, and then it'll work as a little backstop so that this thing sits on my desk like that. So I'm going to solder it with the legs fairly far out of the board so that I can reuse the capacitor for something else if I decide I don't like this idea. But at the moment I kind of do like it, so we'll solder the negative there and the positive there. Oop. So that's permanently attached. It doesn't look like it lasts very long, so you will have to keep charging it up, but that makes it more entertaining. Now these supercapacitor arrays, where you've got this is 6 supercapacitors in series, generally come with a board. This one's in a bit of a mess because I had it outside for some time and not in an enclosure, and it didn't survive. With these protection circuits, which use a little voltage trigger, and when you get to 2.7 volts, these circuits turn on and put resistors across the capacitor. And as long as you charge this with no more than whatever current these resistors can dissipate, then you can bring all the capacitors up to the same voltage simply by allowing all of these circuits to come on. And I think I added LEDs to this, possibly not this one, I can't see any LEDs on there, so that you could see when they all get up to maximum voltage. Now of course these little 2 supercapacitors in series don't have these protection circuits, but it has just occurred to me, well, a little while ago, that these LEDs work in a similar way. Now of course they don't switch on suddenly at a predefined voltage, but they will act to, given a constant current into this board, they will act as a voltage limiter, because if, say, we put 100 milliamps into this board, then at a certain point these LEDs will be bright enough to be drawing a constant 100 milliamps, and there'll be no surplus current in order to charge the capacitor. So we should be able to regulate the voltage that this capacitor gets up to by limiting the current. So I'm just going to fit the connector and do a few tests along those lines. Right, let's start by voltage limiting this to 5 volts so we don't blow up the supercap, and initially a current of 100 milliamps, and see what we get. Switch on. So the voltage is coming up. Now I'm predicting that at a certain voltage this will stabilize and it won't go any higher, simply because as these LEDs get brighter, their current draw will balance the 100 milliamps that this thing is putting in, and the supercap voltage simply won't go any higher. Yes, it's jumping around because of course there aren't enough LEDs for this to present a constant load. And we're still going up actually. It has now just reached 3 volts. So I'll just leave that for a bit and see how much higher that goes. Right, this has reached 3.75 approximately volts. It is creeping up a little bit. Of course it's in current limit, the yellow light there, at 100 milliamps. Now when the average current of all these LEDs reaches 100 milliamps, of course they will draw all the current from this bench power supply. It's a power supply and it's on my bench. That is still creeping up, but it must reach an equilibrium point where the voltage on that capacitor simply can't go any higher, because the LEDs at this brightness are taking all the current that this thing's able to provide. So it is still creeping up, 3.81. I'll come back when it's settled down. I mean, it has virtually reached that point now, but it is still creeping up, and it won't creep up indefinitely because these will get to a brightness where they are drawing all this current. I think we're there actually, but I'll just leave it for a few more minutes. Right, I think that's it. It's topped out at 3.86 volts at 100 milliamps. It's still current limiting at 100 milliamps. So if you have a load which is essentially resistive, it's not quite resistive, but as the current increases, as the voltage increases on that load, the current draw increases, and you have a current limited power supply, then we can hold the voltage on that supercap at a limited maximum. Okay, let's take the current limit up to, I think I have to turn this off to change it, to 120 milliamps. Yeah, 0.12 amps at 5 volts. Turn this back on, and it was 3.86 volts, wasn't it? Let's see what it gets up to with 120 milliamps. So it's approaching the 3.86 that we had before. You can see the 120 milliamps there. The voltage has now gone above that 3.86 volts. Let's see where it settles down. And it looks like that's about it. So at 120 milliamps, this is pushing up to about 4.2 volts. So let's just do one final test at 150 milliamps and see if the power supply, which is also voltage limited, so the capacitor is protected, see if the power supply pushes right up to its full 5 volts. So let's switch that off, set the current to 150 milliamps, 5 volt limit, switch it on. Oh, that voltage fell quite quickly, didn't it? Okay, let's see where this one tops out. Okay, it looks like it's going to top out at something like about 4.75 volts by limiting the current to 150 milliamps. We limit the voltage on this capacitor to 4.75 volts approximately, as long as this load is in place and working. If this load were to disappear, of course the capacitor would shoot straight up to the voltage limit of this power supply. But if you were only current limiting it and didn't have a suitable voltage limit, then of course the capacitor would go over voltage and that might damage it. But yeah, with this load in place, a current limit also acts as a voltage limit on the capacitor. So there we are. That was interesting. That's a nice little fun thing to have on my desk. If I turn this off by doing that, that will of course gradually dim down over time, and then I can turn it back on to make it go bright again. I'm going to have a lot of fun with that over the next few days, but that's it for this video. Cheerio.